Foreign intervention in Syria would cause the whole region to burn. That's the warning from the country's President Bashar al-Assad after more than 7 months of uprising. What does he mean? Is this a threat or a statement of fact? And what does the future hold for Syria and the region? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. In his first interview with the Western media outlets since Syria's 7-month uprising began, President Bashar al-Assad has warned off an earthquake across the Middle East if the West intervenes in his country, adding that such action could cause another Afghanistan. Assad's comments came after the UN Secretary-General made a new call for the repression to end following one of the bloodiest days of the Syrian uprising. Thousands of people took to the streets in 2 Syrian cities after Friday prayers, calling for the imposition of a Libya-style no-fly zone over the country. Activists say that at least 40 people have been killed. Assad insists his country is different in every respect from Egypt, Tunisia, Yemen and Libya, and, according to him, any Western intervention in Syria would see the whole region burn. Dorsa Jabari has more.
Foreign intervention in Syria will, quote, burn the whole region. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad made the statement in his first interview with a Western journalist since the start of the country's uprising. Assad warned what could come of Syria. He said, quote, "Do you want to see another Afghanistan or tens of Afghanistans?" A relaxed and steadfast Assad says he believes he's made enough reform.
He said in the interview that he had already made reforms. He made the distinction between Syria and other countries, which were, he said, more intransigent. He said we didn't play the stubborn government, and of course they've repealed the state of emergency. They have introduced a new party law. They've introduced new laws on demonstrations. Now, for the protesters in places like Homs, that is not enough, and in fact, nothing Assad could do would be enough. They want him gone.
But the reality on the ground appears to tell a different story. This video, reportedly filmed on Friday, shows thousands demonstrating around the country, calling for a no-fly zone. The president admits mistakes have been made by his forces, but now they are only targeting, quote, terrorists. And while Assad thinks he is in full control of the country, more bloodshed over the past 48 hours. Al Jazeera cannot independently verify the footage, but this video, reportedly filmed on Friday in Homs, shows activists chanting "God is great" at the entrance to a mosque. What appears to be a military vehicle drives by. A few seconds later, the shooting starts. Activists say Syrian security forces killed 44 people on Friday, 23 in Homs alone, including 3 women. As the death toll rises, Assad emphasized the importance of unity. He said, quote, "If the plan is to divide Syria, that is to divide the whole region." Assad told The Telegraph his political reforms have, quote, "turned the tide of violence." But his government's crackdown has failed so far to stem the tide of protest. Dorsa Jabari for Inside Story.
Well, actually, since the Syrian uprising began in March, no direct international intervention has been proposed. And many analysts say that the support for the protesters has been balanced against fears of instability in a country at the heart of so many conflicts in the world's most volatile region. The first response came from the US in May. The Obama administration imposed economic sanctions on the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and his top aides. That was followed by similar steps by the EU in August, announcing travel bans, asset freezes, and recently an oil embargo. And as for the Arab League, all it's done to date is to form a committee to forge dialogue between the government and the opposition. Syria has also faced condemnation from the UN and Turkey. But do punitive sanctions, condemnations, and even reconciliation initiatives really work? Well, to discuss this are our 3 guests. In London, Rim Turkmani. She's the Public Relations Officer of Building the Syrian State. That's a political movement for change in Syria. Here in Doha, James Moore Jr., a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Trade Development, and he's also a senior counselor for the strategic communication firm APCO. And in Beirut, Kamal Wazni. He's a political analyst and a professor of international relations. Welcome to you all. Let's begin in Beirut with Kamal Wazni. Why this statement now when, as we pointed out, there have been no real direct threats of Western intervention?
Well, obviously, this statement is not new. The president has issued such a statement before, but today there's a talk about a real threat start emerging after the collapse of Libya, and some people think that Libya is similar to Syria, so the warning is very clear. Syria is different from Libya. Syria is different from other regional Arab for one reason. Libya signed its peace treaty with the American and was not ready for a war. And we have seen that Gaddafi didn't have any weapon. We have to look on the other side. Syria is capable and been ready for a very long time for confrontation with the Israelis. So any attack or thinking of attack against Syria, the Syrian army and the Syrian people are ready to defend the country, and they have the mean and the will, and I guess the motivation to defend the integrity of the country and the sovereignty of the country, because some Western power and some regional power, they think they can change the government or force a change of the government or support some of the activity that is going against Syria. We have some armed, questionable faction been backed by the Turkish. Those are working against the soldier of Syria. And I think if they think they can escalate it and they ask for NATO support, then the president was very clear, I think the president of Syria, that Syria is different, and any attempt to launch an attack, this would change the map and will be an earthquake for the region. And I think the West knows that very much, and the Western power knows it's going to be, as he said, it's going to be tens of Afghanistan, because he know what he's talking about, because some of those in the uprising, mostly fanatic fundamentalists.
Well, if I may, Kamal Wazni, we'll get into the players within this conflict and within this uprising a little bit later, but I just want to go to James Moore here in Doha and ask his opinion about the reason for the timing of this statement by President al-Assad.
Quite frankly, I think that there's a very elaborate public relations program that's taking place in which the audience is in part his own people. The audience in part is the international community. I think he is absolutely correct on one point, and that is the fact that Syria is very different than Libya, is very different than Tunisia, is very different than Egypt. And trying to be able to address exactly how to be able to tack this ship of government and how to be able to remain in power is clearly foremost on his mind, in being able to essentially come out with this kind of public relations. He's been meeting with a number of leaders, including individuals part of the Arab League, and communicating with them as well, in addition to the media, on exactly what he believes will happen in the event that there is any kind of intervention whatsoever.
Rim Turkmani in London, is this actually him saying hands off? Is this a warning?
I think it's a sign of desperation of anything, but I think the regime got it right that if there's a military intervention in Syria, of course, the whole region will go into unrest. He's got it right, and he's right that Syria is different, but he is wrong to rely on this to guarantee its survival. If there is no external intervention, it doesn't mean that the power from inside Syria, the power of the people of the street, is not able to overthrow the regime. It's going to happen. So the regime is really wrong to rely on this equation that any military intervention will actually lead to a war in the whole region. And he's very wrong also to say that it's going to be another Afghanistan. It certainly is not.
Well, Kamal Wazni, to put the president's comments into a context, what he actually said as well was that Syria is the hub of the region. He said it's the fault line. It's a nation of some 20 million with Christian and Alawite minorities, very significant minority groups. And certainly his opinion is that it's because of the nature as well of Syrian society that intervention would meet with far different circumstances or results than in other areas, perhaps. Your view of his context on this?
Well, obviously, we have to highlight the issue that there's a lot of Syrians still supporting the president of Syria. The majority of the Syrians still demonstrating in his behalf. We have seen the demonstration that took place in Halab, mostly Sunnah, in Damascus, mostly Sunnah. In other area, I mean, I have to mention Sunnah or Arabi or Druze, but there's still the large support backing the president. But we have to remember that beside the beside the majority of the Syrian still backing the president, and we've seen millions in the street, you have to remember that Bashar Assad is not alone. There is a lot of forces in the region, still it's part of the resistance, still support the regime of Bashar Assad, and they're not gonna stand idle in the face of any attack, Western attack against Syria. We've seen the Iranian, we've seen the Iraqi emerging very strongly in support of Bashar Assad. We've seen the large part of the Lebanese, mostly Hezbollah, still supporting the Bashar al-Assad, and they owe him a big deal because he stood with them in 2006 when the Israeli aggression against Lebanon. So the president of Syria is not alone, and he's not fighting this battle alone when it comes to the Western power. They want to if they decide to mobilize their forces against Syria. They know that Syria, it's on the border of Israel, and any attack is going to be open war with Israel. And I don't think the American at this point, they want to gamble on the issue of the stability of the region, because if it happened in Syria, I think the Persian Gulf is going to be in flame. And I think they know, the American knows very well, now at this time economically it's not feasible to launch a war in the Middle East. We're going through very economic difficulty, and any disturbance in the Middle East, we bring in the whole world not into only a war, we bring in this war to a depression, and nobody can afford it in the economic level, in the political level, in the military level, and we don't want the fundamentalists to rule this part of the world. America still feel the pain of that is taking place in Afghanistan, and a couple days ago they lost a lot of soldiers. Those people, if you allow them to empower, you getting into a trouble. The same mistake the American made at one point in Afghanistan. They shouldn't think or dare think about it.
Well, let me put that particular point that you made there. I'd like to put that point to Rim Turkmani, the point that Bashar al-Assad is not alone. How valid do you think that position is?
Well, it's true he's not alone. I mean, he probably have, I don't know, 20, 30% of the population. It's very difficult to tell. It's true that there's still some people able to go to the street for his support. But if he gives the same security to everybody to go and protest on the street, to voice their opinion, we're going to see far more protests against Bashar than people with him. And it's true that the presence of these supporters, and they're not all just from the Alawite community. I mean, like the demonstrators in Damascus, where mainly they're not, from the Alawite community. It's true that the presence of this support will complicate any international intervention. But this should be another reason why pressure should be applied on this regime to stop the security operation, because it's leading now towards a civil war, and a civil war will also lead to unrest in the region and will also inflame the whole area.
Well, we've heard Kamal Wazni refer to this, but James Moore, I'd like to bring up this point with you. The president himself has said that what is happening in Syria at the moment is largely a struggle between Islamism and pan-Arabism between the forces, religious forces, and essentially secular ones. How valid do you believe that argument is?
I think he's trying to use that to his benefit. There's no question that Syria has been a country in which a number of religions have been able to essentially coexist. But we've got to remember that he essentially has a grip of power that essentially he inherited from a father who had an extraordinary political and military infrastructure put into place. He's continuing on, even with some of the same individuals who served his father. But he is truly the president of a country that is an extraordinary geographical region of the world. When you think about the fact that he is surrounded by Iran, by Israel, and by Turkey to the west, and Turkey, which had been an incredibly tight ally at one point, is essentially harboring many of these insurgents. But it's interesting to realize that the opposition in Syria itself has not called for international intervention. It has not called for armed insurrection. And so even the opposition is trying to still deal with the very real fact that essentially Syria is in a stalemate.
Well, Kamal Wasni, to follow up on the point that you brought up that we've now been discussing, he did, in fact, the president, refer to his father. He said that the Muslim Brotherhood has been an enemy in Syria for a long period of time, referring to that time in 1982 when his father repressed and crushed an uprising in the city of Hama. Do you believe that there's validity to this point, that those behind the unrest come from forces that are intent on some kind of sectarian battle?
Well, obviously, there's merit to that statement, and there's fact, because we have seen how they've been arming themselves and how they've been getting backing from unfortunately, from Turkey. Turkey has been playing a very unfriendly role in this part. They've been supporting those armed opposition groups who engage in killing soldiers and the Syrian army. This is not new, and at one point the American has enlisted the Syrian help in fighting fanatics in the region. And we know that a lot of al-Qaeda still does work worked in Syria, and the one who started the war with them was Hafez al-Assad. Before they became what we know a major enemy of the West. So it should not be surprise to the American, it should not be surprise to Western world, and they should not be considered what he's saying unreasonable, because we know that al-Qaeda is capable of launching a massive attack against anybody. And we see what they have done in Iraq and what they have done in other parts of the world. So his fight with the fundamentalists, with the Muslim Brotherhood, did not start from yesterday. It has root, and I think somebody is playing with the fire, thinking they can capitalize on this fraction and they can maybe change the regime. But I think this is going to backfire, not against those people, against everybody in the region and in the world. And I think this is a miscalculation on the part of the Western world and on the American, not to mention the Turkey, because the Turkey should play a friendly role and should help Syria actually heal and reconcile its difference, because we know that some people, they have legitimate demand, they want reform and they want a new constitution, and I think the president tomorrow can address that, because he's going to chair that committee that will build the constitution or new constitution for the Syrian people. But continuing to causing the friction and arming and funding these, I call it and militia inside Syria with the help with regional power and some other countries, this is not going to help the stability of Syria, and it's not going to help the stability of the world.
Rim Turkmani in London, if you would like to respond to that point, that the conflict within Syria is coming from the outside. That is the assumptions that we are hearing made now.
I completely disagree. I disagree with the statement of the president that this is fight against Islamic terrorism. I disagree with your guest that there is any merit to the statement. The group I work with, Building the Syrian State group, has been involved with the demonstration from day one. And we know very well from inside information this is not an Islamic movement. The first political figure or opposition figure to be arrested after the onset of the uprising, Luay Hussein, is certainly not an Islamist. He's calling for a state independent of any ideology, a state for all its people. Other people like Hazem al-Nahar or the Christian George Sabra or Ghiatha Ayoun Soud, who's the head of a communist party, they've been arrested as well, tortured badly, and then released, and they're all certainly not Islamist. We haven't seen signs of Islamic movement in the street. We haven't seen their logos. If they were really Al-Qaeda, the first thing we would have seen is them calling this regime kafir, infidels. And from all the logos, all the statements we've seen from the street, we haven't seen anything saying this is an infidel regime. We haven't seen signs calling for Islamic states. So this is certainly a false statement. And I think the President Bashar is making a statement for these two reasons. First of all, it's sending a signal to the West that we have a common enemy, we should fight against it. Second of all, it's also sending a signal to the internal opposition and external opposition, which is more on the secular side, trying to say, this is an Islamic uprising, let's all get together to fight against it. And if I want to speak on the behalf of the current I work with, Building the Syrian State current, we say, we're certainly not falling into this. We know it's not Islamic, and we're very confident that the rest of the opposition groups are also not going to fall into this as well.
Well, at this point, let's just pause here and say the Syrian debate has been carried far beyond the Middle East. In London, for example, protests both for and against the government of Bashar al-Assad have taken place. Let's hear from both sides.
I think our people have reached the point of no return. We either get rid of this brutal regime and get our freedom, or they will kill us all.
I think President Assad has to make a stand for future generations. Do we want somebody else to come and tell us what Syrian legitimacy is or not? I think he is right to say everything has to happen through the Syrian mechanism itself.
Well, James Moore here in Doha, there's been the suggestion as well by some observers that those who are still supporting Bashar al-Assad are coming from those minorities who do feel a threat from the majority within Syria itself. Do you think that there's any reality or validity to that particular point, that the minorities fear some kind of retaliation?
Well, yes, indeed. Quite frankly, the Archbishop of the Catholic Church in Syria has been trying desperately to have Catholics try to hold on to the Assad regime, because they are looking at places like Egypt and elsewhere where they're finding that in the aftermath of overtaking governments, that it is a very difficult thing to be able to respect the rights of minorities. And so there are those groups certainly that exist in Syria that would prefer to have President Assad remain in power. But I think it's important to realize that with the opposition, that for every 1,000 people that are out protesting, the government is able to bring out 3,000 individuals on another day to be able to show exactly where the support lies. But I want to be able to correct one thing, and that is that as far as the United States and the Pentagon somehow sitting in a room at this hour when we're together here trying to figure out how to intervene militarily in Syria is absolutely ludicrous. I think we're going to see over these coming months a President Assad who is going to remain in power, and we're going to be seeing how the West continues to twist the knife in trying to make things more difficult for the Assad government. But the notion that somehow this is because of the opposition and seeing some of these protests and even some of these deaths, that somehow the government of President Assad is going to fold by year's end is absolutely a fallacy.
Well, Kamal Wazni, very briefly, because we're coming to the end of the show, do you believe that the situation is resolvable with President Bashar al-Assad remaining in power?
Obviously, I think the international community has an obligation to help the reconciliation with the people of Syria. Yes, there is some issue need to be resolved. My friend in London should be allowed to participate in a government, but it has to be, the process has to start in Syria and from Syria and not without any Western intervention.
Well, let's go to London on
terrorist activity.
Let's go to London on that particular
country.
point, to Rum Turkmani, to follow up on your point there.
I don't want to participate in a government that this regime is part of, not under its reform, certainly not under its agenda. We don't accept dialogue with this regime. We don't accept the reform that Bashar al-Assad talked about in his interview. We think the autocratic dictatorship is irreformable, certainly beyond repair. We only accept sitting with them on the table to negotiate how to end the security operation, because it's increasingly leading to a civil war, because there are tens of people being killed every day. We certainly want to stop this bloodbath, and we're ready to negotiate to achieve that. And we can negotiate the transitional region to end this regime and reach a free democratic Syria where everybody, including al-Ba'ath Party, can participate in free elections, and then we'll see who's going to win.
Well, at that particular point, my thanks to our guests, Rum Turkmani, James Moore Jr. and Kamal Wazni. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.com. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.